columnist and Pulitzer Prize winner visited MHS for a book talk. In this section, Messenger discusses what it is like to be an opinions writer.
So I would say a very high percentage of my columns, 80% of them or so, I don't even use first person. I don't necessarily express an opinion. That doesn't mean they aren't opinionated, because I tend to frame my columns in a way that makes it pretty clear to the reader what I care about. And sometimes that comes out through just choosing the topic or just choosing the people that I want to interview and deciding how I'm going to frame that column. And so because I write a reported column, most of my column comes from facts that I got in public documents or interviews or events that I observed myself, whether it's covering a trial or covering a city council meeting or something like that. The opinion generally is expressed through the course of me interviewing certain people and allowing their opinion to drive the story. I allow the sources that I choose to be part of the story to really frame the story. There's very few times that I actually write, I believe this, and this is why I believe this. There's times when I do that because it informs the reader what my particular bias is. And sometimes I want the reader to know, because I'm a columnist, it's both accepted and okay. I'm paid for my opinion. I want the reader to know what my bias is, because then they can use that to judge the overall nature of the column and the facts that I'm focusing on, instead of others that I might leave out or not elevate in the same way. So what I do is really a hybrid between opinion writing of what you might see on an opinion page and news writing. And that's why I appear in the news pages. I'm on page 2, but sometimes my column runs on page 1, because I frequently write about topics that nobody else is writing about, and I break news. And when that happens, we put it on page 1. We still have my column mug, so readers know, hey, look, this is coming from a columnist, but you can read it and see the facts for what they are and make a judgment as to how credible it is. It's a combination. So my columns build on themselves. So I write about a lot of the same topics a lot. So I follow a story all the way through. An example. So many years ago, I wrote about a gentleman named Demetrius Woods. He's the first person that Governor Mike Parson used his power of clemency. Governors have power to reduce people's sentences or pardon them and make crimes go away, just like presidents do, but within the state as compared to the federal system. And Demetrius Woods was a 41-year-old black man from St. Louis who had a drug trafficking conviction in which he got a really, really heavy sentence that was out of whack for what he did. And I wrote about him when he was paroled, and then when the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that the judge got it wrong, that he wasn't allowed to be paroled because the legislature had changed the law, and he was getting ready with having to go back to prison, even though he had been free for 2 years. And Governor Parson commuted his sentence so that he could stay free. So I wrote about him the first time in 2018 or 2019. And I wrote about him 2 or 3 times around that time in which he was, possibly having to go back to prison. Well, I wrote about him again this week because the governor created quite a controversy when he commuted the sentence of the son of Kansas City Chiefs coach Andy Reid. And a lot of people were highly critical because he took this white, wealthy, connected guy and let him get out of prison when a lot of people that don't look like him or have his experience are still stuck in prison for similar charges. And he was getting beat up a lot. The governor was getting beat up from Republicans, Democrats, lots of people. And I actually wrote a column that took a slightly different look and said, you know what? This governor actually uses the power of commutation more than any governor in Missouri history. And the first guy he let out was Demetrius Woods, who was a black man on a drug conviction. And so I pointed out some context in this column that a lot of people didn't know. Well, I knew about it because I knew Demetrius. I had his phone number. I had written about him several years ago, and we had a good relationship. He took my call and had a nice interview and wrote that column. So what happens is I write a lot about the criminal justice field, and so there are a lot of lawyers and people in the community who are charged with crimes or whatever, or have family members who have been, who call me up and say, hey, I got another one. It's along the lines of something you wrote about before. You might be interested. That's probably the number one area in which my ideas are generated, is from the community of people that I've written about over the years that feed me columns back and forth and give me ideas. But the other thing is I read the paper every day. And I know what I'm interested in. And, you know, a lot of times I use my column to add a perspective to an ongoing story that people are paying attention to. And I think I have something to say or know something about it in which I might offer a perspective that's a little bit different. And so sometimes it's just from reading the paper. But my biggest source is people that I've written about and people in the communities that I've written about who send me ideas and email me or call me or let me know, hey, there's a court case you might be interested in. And then once I've written about all of these things, you know, sometimes I might write 5 or 6 or 7 columns on one particular topic. Once I get a hold of something and I'm really interested in it and it's a good story, then I just follow it as long as I can. So when I started covering these cases, and I wrote about Brooke, and then Brooke introduced me to Amy Murn. I wrote about Amy Murn. Amy introduced me to Leanne Banderman, and I wrote about Leanne. All of these cases had similar fact patterns. And there was sometimes you had to retell the story because you know that not every reader read the first 2 or 3. And so sometimes you got to repeat things so that people really get to understand it. But then you start to expand the story. It's not just about the board bill. It's about all of these other fines and fees. It's not just about this part of the criminal justice system. It's also about the drug testing and the public defender and everything else. So you have to repeat some things, but you try to keep finding one new detail that gets the reader to come back, and then hopefully you keep finding them.
Perfect. Can we give them a round of applause?